6. The Hunter's Moon. An afternoon breeze carried the scent of fresh blood. Shrieks of agony and death pierced tendrils of mist snagged by the gnarled branches of greel trees. The reports of weapons, old and new, projectile and energy, reverberated from the escarpment that walled the ancient fortress to the west, behind which the system's primary was just now disappearing. As if some fantastic statuary, perched atop a place of worship, Magister Hego Damask stood on the uppermost rampart, his black cloak fluttering, attuned to the sounds of slaughter, and to the clamor of parties of beings returning from their separate hunts, blood of whatever color and consistency, stirred by primal violence, voices lifted in ancient song or throaty chant, the gutted carcasses of their prey strapped to anti-grav litters, ready for roasting over bonfires that blazed in the fort's central courtyard, or for preservation by skilled taxidermists, Wehrmacht, Nexu, Mongwurst, Krayt Dragon, Acklay, Reek, whatever their preference. A nod to the planet that had birthed it, the moon was known as Sojourn, a name whispered by those who knew it slightly, and even by those who had visited repeatedly over the centuries. The system could be found in the registries, but only if one knew where to look, and how to decipher the data that revealed its location. Here, once every standard year, Damask and the dozen munes who made up Damask Holdings hosted a gathering of influential beings from across the galaxy. Their names might be known to a few, but they were largely invisible to the masses, and could move among them unrecognized, though they were responsible, in no small measure, for events that shaped galactic history. They were conveyed to Sojourn in secret, aboard ships designed by Rugus Gnome, and owned by Hego Damask. None came without an invitation, for to do so was to risk immediate destruction. What they shared to a being was Damask's belief that financial profit mattered more than notoriety, politics, or vulgar morality. Founded generations earlier by members of the intergalactic banking clan, Sojourn had begun as a place of relaxation for the clan's wealthiest clientele, a perquisite for those of exalted privilege. Later, under the management of the elder Damask, Hego's biological father, on his retirement from chairmanship of the IBC, the moon had become something else, a place where only the most important players were brought together to exchange ideas. It was on Sojourn that the Galactic Credit Standard had been established, the chancellorship of Ixis Valorum first proposed, the makeup of the Trade Federation Directorate reorganized. Then, under Hego Damask, Sojourn became something else again. No longer a resort or think tank, but an experiment in bolder thinking, in social alchemy. A place to plot and strategize and wrench the course of galactic history from the hands of happenstance. Where once Eotran Brandsman had provided security, Damask's contingent of silver-suited Ikani Sun Guards now held sway. At great expense, scarlet wood greel tree saplings had been smuggled from P3 and planted in Sojourn's modified soil. The forests had been stocked with cloned game and exotic creatures, the ancient fort transformed into a kind of lodge, with Damask's very important guests residing in purposefully crude shelters with names like Nest, Cave, Hideaway, and Escarpment, all to encourage a like-mindedness that would end in partnerships of an unusual sort. Damask remained on the rampart, while the light waned, and darkness crept over the forested landscape. In the grand courtyard below, the bonfire flames leapt higher, and the odors of charred meat hung thickly in the air. Wines and other intoxicants flowed freely. Twi'lek and Phelan females entertained, and the crowd grew rowdy. Each hunting party was required to display and butcher its prizes, to get limbs and other appendages wet with blood. Not all beings were meat-eaters, but at midnight the guiding principles of the Republic would be mocked in skits, and prominent senators, save for those present, would be subjected to ridicule. That Sith ceremonies and symbols had been incorporated into the ceremonies, and the architecture of the fortress was Damask's secret alone. Sensing the arrival of Larsh Hill and two other munes, he swung from the parapet view. "The hut has been waiting since Starfall," Hill said. "The price of meeting with me," Damask said. Hill gave him a long-suffering look. If she didn't know as much, she would be long gone. The Magister tailed the trio down a long flight of stone steps and into a yawning reception area, warmed by colorful rugs, tapestries, and a grand fire. Gardella Basadi the Elder, crime lord and notorious gambler, floated in on a palanquin appropriate to her great size, attended by an entourage that included her Rhodian majordomo, bodyguards, and others. Damask's own guards were quick to usher everyone but the Hutt back into the waiting room. Larsh Hill and the two other dark-cloaked Munes remained at Damask's side. Curled upright on her powerful tail, Gardella extended her bare, stubby arms toward the fire. "I've been admiring your entertainers, Magister," she said. "Particularly the Phelan singers. Perhaps you could help me procure some." "We've a Twi'lek who supplies the females," Damask said from his armchair. "You'll have to speak with her." Gardella noted the sharp tone in his voice. "On to business, then." Damask offered a gesture of apology. "A busy schedule affords me scant time for pleasantries." Unaccustomed to straight talk, the Hutt frowned, then said, "I plan to make a grab for Tatooine, Magister, and I've come to solicit your support." "An arid world in the Arcanist sector of the Outer Rim," Hill supplied quietly from behind the armchair. "By support, I presume we are talking about credits," Damask said. Gardella repositioned herself on the litter. "I'm aware that you disapprove of spice and slavery, but there are profits to be made on Tatooine by other means." "Not moisture farming, then?" Gardella glowered. "You mock me." Damask motioned negligently. "I tease you, Gardella. I know little about Tatooine, other than that the planet was heir to an ecological catastrophe in the dim past, and that its vast deserts now support a population of ne'er-do-wells, scoundrels, and hapless spacers of all species. I've heard it said that nothing pans out on Tatooine, and that beings who reside there age prematurely." Damask knew, too, that the ancient Sith had once had an outpost on Tatooine, but he kept that to himself. "Fortunately, longevity comes naturally to my species," Gardella said. "But I don't want for enemies of a different sort, Magister. Enemies who would like nothing more than to see me in an early grave. The Desilogit clan. They are precisely the reason I wish to remove myself from Nal Hutta, and from the likes of Jabba Desilogit Tur and the rest. With your financial assistance I can accomplish that. I know that you have befriended Hutts in your own planetary neighborhood. It's true that Drixo and Proga have done well for themselves on Comra," Damask said, "but their successes came at a high cost. What are you offering in return for our investment?" A light came into the Hutt's dark, oblique eyes. "A pod race course that will make those on Malastare and on your own Moonalinst seem like amateur runs. In addition, the renaissance of an annual pod race event that will bring tens of thousands of gamblers to Tatooine and fill my coffers to overflowing." She paused, then added, "And I'm willing to take you on as a partner." "A silent partner," Damask amended. She nodded. "As you wish." Damask steepled his long fingers and raised his hands to his jutting chin. "In addition to a percentage of the profits, I want you to arrange for Boss Cabra to operate freely on Nar Shaddaa." Gardella adopted an incredulous look. "The Dug crime boss? You know the one," Hill said sharply. "The Hutt Black Sun is deeply entrenched on Nar Shaddaa, and the Vigos are grooming Alexi Garin to assume control of the organization. They may not appreciate or permit." "Those are our terms, Gardella," Damask cut in. "Find some way to allow Cabra to reach an accommodation with Black Sun, and we will support your takeover of Tatooine." He gestured toward the fortress courtyard. "This very night I can arrange for you to meet with officials representing the Bank of Argao, who will advance whatever amount of credits you need." After a long moment of silence, Gardella nodded. "I accept your terms, Magister Damask. You will not be disappointed." When the Hutt had steered her anti-grav litter from the room, members of the Sun Guard showed in a group of tall reptilian sentients who stood on two thick legs and whose broad snouts curved downward at the tip. Damask's previous contact with the Yinkori had been limited to holoprojector. Now he leaned forward in keen interest as the spokesmember introduced himself in gruff basic as K-Hook, Secretary of the Council of Elders, and launched immediately into a diatribe denouncing the Senate for refusing to admit Yinkor to the Republic. With bellicose encouragement from his comrades, K-Hook went on to say with fist-pounding emphasis that although their homeworld had been charted hundreds of years earlier by the Republic, Yinkor remained an underprivileged, back-rocket planet deserving of far better treatment. or someone will pay in blood for the ongoing injustice, the secretary warned. Larsh Hill waited until he was certain that Kahuk was finished to remark under his breath, "I'm not sure even the Senate is ready for them." Holding Kahuk's baleful gaze and motioning with his hand, Damask said, "You have no interest in seeing Yinkor seated in the Senate." Kahuk took umbrage. "Why else would we have journeyed all this way?" "You have no interest in seeing Yinkor seated in the Senate," Plagueis repeated. Kahuk glanced at his green-skinned brethren, then looked at Hill. "Is Magister Damask deaf or in ill health?" Hill turned to Damask in concern but said nothing. Damask concealed his astonishment. As rumored, the Yinkori were apparently resistant to forced suggestion. But how was it possible that midi-chlorians, in a being of relatively low intelligence, could erect an impenetrable wall against the influence of a Sith? Was this some sort of survival mechanism, the midi-chlorians' way of protecting the consciousness of their vessels by refusing to be manipulated? He would need to possess one of these beings to learn the secret. "We might be willing to help you lobby for representation in the Senate," he said at last, "but the process could require standard years or even decades, and I'm not convinced you have the patience for it." Kahuk's wide nostrils flared. "What's a decade when we have been patient for a century? Are we not sentients? Or are we required to embrace?" Damask shook his head. "No one is asking you to applaud the arrangement." Kahuk's expression softened somewhat. "Then we have an accord? We will draw up a contract," Damask said. "In the meantime, I want some assurance that I can call on you for a personal favor should the need arise." Kahuk stared at him. "A personal favor? Of what sort?" Damask showed the palms of his hands. "Of whatever sort I require, Secretary." The Yinkori and his brethren traded uncertain glances, but Kahuk ultimately nodded in agreement. "Done, Magister." "A favor?" Hill asked as the Yinkori were being seen out. "Nothing more than a test," Damask told him. Next to be admitted for audience were two Grand. The larger of the pair, a Republic senator named Pax Team, represented the Grand Protectorate. Team had scarcely taken a seat when he said, "Promise me, Magister Damask, that you haven't entered into a deal with Gardella." "Our dealings with the Hutts," Hill said, "are no less confidential than our dealings with you, Senator Team." The Grand's trio of stalked eyes twitched in anger. Rumors abound of Gardella's plans to refurbish the pod race course on Tatooine and enter into direct competition with Malastare. Damask regarded him blankly. "Surely you haven't come all this way to hear me address rumors." Team worked his big jaw. "Promises were made, Magister." "And fulfilled," Damask said. Then in a calmer voice, he added, "As a means of offsetting losses in revenue derived from pod racing, the cost of Malastare's fuel exports could be raised." The Grand ruminated. "That sounds more like a possibility than a guarantee." Damask shrugged. "We take it up with the steerage committee. But for now, consider it a starting point for discussion." Reclining in the chair, he appraised Team before saying, "What else is troubling you, Senator?" "The favoritism you show to the Trade Federation." "We merely helped them secure full representation in the Senate," Hill answered. Team grew strident. "The Directorate was doing perfectly well for itself, without full representation. And in exchange for what? Surrendering some of the shipping monopoly they enjoyed in the Outer Rim?" "What's fair is fair," Hill said evenly. Team gave him a scathing glance. "Fairness has no part in it. You're interested only in having the Directorate do your bidding on Coruscant." Abruptly, he got to his big feet and ground his square teeth. "Even a rate hike for Malastare's fuel will profit Damask Holdings and the Trade Federation more than it will me." The Grand showed the Munes his back and began to stamp toward the door, leaving his aide to stir in confusion for a moment, before he, too, rose and hurried out. Hill's mouth was open in surprise. "He can't." "Let him go," Damask said. The elder Mune compressed already thin lips. "If we're to benefit from the power they wield in the Senate, we'll need to find some way to placate them, Hago." "I disagree," Damask said. "We need to find a way to show Team that he is expendable." By the time the guards had ushered in the quartet of Gossams who managed subtext mining, his ire had risen so high in his throat he could taste it. Typical of their diminutive species, the three Saurians had reverse-articulated legs, fish-shaped heads, and long necks Damask knew he could snap with 2 fingers, and perhaps would, for how they had double-crossed Tenebris. "We were stunned to receive your invocation, Magister," Subtext's chief operating officer said. "We had no idea we were even on your scanners." Damask smiled thinly. "We keep a close watch on galactic events." I trust you've been enjoying our food and entertainment. More than you know, Magister, the Chief Gossam said, with a meaningful laugh. Or perhaps more than we care to admit. Damask forced a kindred laugh. More than I know. That's very funny indeed. He broke off laughing to add, allow us to show you how we execute some of the inner workings of the gathering. The Gossams looked at one another in surprise before their leader said, we'd be honored. The mask stood and nodded to 4 of the Sun Guards, who fell in alongside the Gossams as he, Hill, and 2 other Munes led them to a bank of ancient turbolift cars. All the real action takes place below, Damask said, setting the car in motion with a wave of his hand. In silence they descended 2 levels, and when the car's doors parted, they filed into a cavernous underground hall. Central to the dimly lighted space were several large square platforms that could be raised by means of hydraulic pulls, operated by separate teams of sweating, snuffling, snub-nosed Ugnaughts. One platform, burdened with a slag heap of metal, was just descending, to sounds of raucous cheering and wild applause, entering through an opening in the towering ceiling. Secured by manacles and chains on an adjacent platform, writhed a hissing, snarling, fanged beast the size of a bantha. Wooed directly beneath the central courtyard, Damask explained, as the beast-laden platform was elevating. Each cargo symbolizes an abhorrent aspect of the Republic, practices we all wish to see overturned. By then, the platform had been raised to the level of the courtyard. The crowd quieted for a moment. Then, simultaneous with massive discharges of energy, erupted into ovation once more. Those discharges were the laser cannons doing their work, Damask said loudly enough to be heard, as the platform dropped back into view, revealing that what had been the beast was now a smoking, foul-smelling husk of sinew and bone. He aimed a sinister smile at the Gossams. It's all theater, you understand. Merriment for the masses. Obviously a real crowd-pleaser, Magister, one of the Gossams said, swallowing some of his words. Damask spread his thin arms wide. Then you must join in. Approaching, he nodded his chin toward one of the empty platforms, beside which the Sun Guards had positioned themselves. Climb aboard. The Saurians stared at him. Go ahead, Damask said, without humor now. Climb aboard. 2 of the guards brandished blasters. The Chief Gossam looked from one Mune to the next, terror widening his eyes. Have we done something to displease you, Magister? A good question, Damask said. Have you? The Chief Gossam didn't speak until all 4 had clambered up onto the platform. Precisely, how did we come to your notice? A mutual friend brought you to our attention, Damask said. A Biff named Ruges Gnome. You recently supplied him with a survey report and a mining probe. The platform began to rise, and the Gossams extended their long necks in fear. We can make this right, one of them said in a pleading voice. Damask eyed the ceiling. Then be quick about it. The laser cannons fire automatically. Plasma! The same one fairly shrieked. An untapped reservoir of plasma, enough to provide energy to 1,000 worlds. Damask signaled one of the Ugnaughts to halt the platform's rise. Where? On what world? Naboo, the Gossam said. Then louder, Naboo. Hill elaborated, though unnecessarily. Something of a hermit planet in the mid-rim, and capital of the Chommel sector. Relatively close to Tatooine, in fact. Once a source for the Veermoks we had cloned for use as game in the Greel forests. Damask allowed him to finish and looked up at the Gossams. Who hired you to conduct a mining survey? A faction in opposition to the monarchy, Magister. We swear it to be true, another said. This Naboo is ruled by a royal? Damask asked. A king, the Chief Gossam said. His detractors wish to see the planet open to galactic trade. Damask paced away from the platform. He considered torturing the Gossams, to learn who had hired them to sabotage Tenebrous on Baldemnik, but decided to leave that for another day, since the Bith was known to have had many adversaries. Turning finally, he ordered the Ugnaught to return the platform to the floor. This plasma reservoir is as enormous as you claim? He demanded. Unique. Damask regarded them in silence, then swung to the commander of the Sun Guards. Transport them to the most remote world you can find in the Tingle Arm, and make certain they remain there in the event I have further need of them. Leaving his fellow moons to rest, Damask climbed the fort's eastern rampart for Starrise. He was as weary as any of them, but too dissatisfied with the outcome of the gathering to find much comfort in sleep. On the chance that an untapped reservoir of plasma might be of interest to the disgruntled leadership of the Trade Federation, and ignoring for the moment the effect it could have on Malastaire's energy exports, he had ordered Hill and the others to learn everything they could about the planet Naboo and its isolationist monarch. Once the gossames of subtext mining had been dealt with, Damask and the Moons had devoted the rest of the evening to meeting with members of what they termed their steering committee, which was made up of select politicians, lobbyists, and industrialists, financiers representing Sistina, Argao, and the Bank of the Core, elite members of the Order of the Canted Circle and the Trade Federation Directorate, and gifted ship designers like Nero Cianar, whom Plagueis planned to support in his bid to become Chief Operating Officer of Sampi Cianar Technologies. The committee met periodically, though seldom on sojourn, to assure the swift passage of corporate-friendly legislation, fix the price of such commodities as Tabana gas, Transparasteel, and Starship fuel, and keep senators in place on Coruscant as career diplomats, as a means of distancing them from what was really taking place outside the core. Not everyone agreed that the Moon's strategy of tactical restriction was the best method for keeping the Republic off balance and thus ripe for manipulation. But Damask had insisted that their common goal of oligarchy, government by a select few, would eventually be realized, even if attained as a result of actions and events few would observe, and about which some of the membership might never learn. Starlight glinted from the hulls of the last of the departing ships. Damask took comfort in knowing that his guests believed they had taken part in something secretive and grand, and had been encouraged to execute campaigns that on the surface may have seemed informed by self-interest, but were in fact bits of Sith business. Movements in the symphony that was the grand plan. Keening klaxons fractured the morning silence. Damask's eyes narrowed and swept the surrounding forests for signs of disturbance. He had moved to the southernmost parapet, when two sun guards hurried up the stairs in search of him. "Magister, the eastern perimeter has been breached," one of them reported. Outside the fort's walls, illumination was coming up, and drone ships were beginning to meander through the treetops. Occasionally one of the imported beasts would lumber into the safe zone, touching off the alarms, but none of the remote cams were showing evidence of intrusion. "It's possible that one of our guests may have overstayed his or her welcome," the second sun guard said. He stopped to listen to a message being relayed to his helmet earphones. "We think we have something." He looked at Damask. "Will you be all right, Magister, or should we wait with you?" "Go," Damask told them, "but keep me informed." Stretching out with his feelings, he began to scan the forest again. Someone was out there, but not in the area the guards were searching. He attended through the force to the sound of movement in the trees. Had the Gran infiltrated an assassin? If so, had they found one clever enough to divert the sun guards into chasing an illusion? Damask and the other Moons should have been the targets, but instead of moving toward the fort, the intruder was actually moving away from it. He spent another long moment listening, then, like a wraith, he dashed down 3 flights of stone steps and out through the old gate into the waking forest, parting his cloak as he ran, his left hand on the hilt of the lightsaber. Lifting off in great numbers from their evening roosts and screeching in displeasure, the morning's earliest risers warned the rest that a hunter was on the loose. Of the most dangerous sort, Damask might have added, a hunter of sentience. In moments he was deep in a stand of old-growth greel trees well outside the security perimeter, when he sensed something that stopped him in mid-stride. Motionless, he drew inward in an effort to verify what he'd felt. A Force user. A Jedi spy? He wondered. They had tried repeatedly to penetrate Sojourn's defenses during previous gatherings. But unless one had arrived in a ship designed and built by Darth Tenebrous, there would have been no way to reach the surface undetected. And yet someone had obviously succeeded in making it downside. Lifting his hand from the hilt of the lightsaber, Damask minimized his presence in the Force, surrendering his eminence and disappearing into the material world. Then he began to move deeper into the forest, winding his way through the trees, allowing the Jedi to stalk him, even as he berated himself for having acted rashly. If it came to ambush, he would not be able to fight back and risk exposing himself as a Sith. He should have allowed the Sun Guards to deal with the intruder. But why would a Jedi bother to trip the perimeter sensors, only to retreat beyond their reach? They didn't make mistakes of that sort, and surely whoever was out there wouldn't have expected a moon to respond, if for no other reason than moons didn't make mistakes of that sort. So what was this one after? Ahead, Damask heard the characteristic hiss and hum of a lightsaber, and saw the weapon's blade glowing in the mist. Emerging from behind a thick, bold tree, the wielder had the lightsaber in his right hand, angled toward the spongy ground. A crimson blade in a crimson wood. Instantly he called his own lightsaber to his left hand, igniting the blade as the figure in the mist revealed itself fully. A tall, thin, pink-skinned craniopod with large lidless eyes. A Bith. Tenebris? He faltered momentarily. No, that wasn't possible. But who then? Tenebris's offspring, perhaps. Some spawn grown from his genetic material in a laboratory, since the species reproduced only in accordance with the dictates of a computer mating service. Was that why Tenebris had declined to discuss midichlorians or ways of extending life? Because he had already found a way to create a Force-sensitive successor? I knew I could draw you out, Darth Plagueis, the Bith said. Plagueis dropped all pretense and faced him squarely. You're well trained. I've Darth Tenebris to thank for it. He made you in his image. You're a product of Bith science. The Bith laughed harshly. You're an old fool. He found and trained me. Plagueis recalled the warning Tenebris had nearly given voice to before he died. He took you as an apprentice? I am Darth Venamis. Darth? Plagueis said with disgust. We'll see about that. Your death will legitimize the title, Plagueis. Plagueis cocked his head to the side. Your master left orders for you to kill me. The Bith nodded. Even now he awaits my return. Awaits what? Plagueis said. As astonishing as it was to learn that Tenebris had trained a second apprentice, he had a surprise in store for Venamis. Inhaling, he said, Tenebris is dead. Confusion showed in Venamis's eyes. You wish it were so. Plagueis held his lightsaber off to one side, parallel to the ground. What's more, he died by my hand. Impossible. Plagueis laughed with purpose. How powerful can you be if you failed to sense the death of your master? Even now, your thoughts fly in all directions. Venamis raised his lightsaber over one shoulder. In killing you, I will avenge his death and become the Sith Lord he knew you could never be. The Sith he wanted me to be, Plagueis corrected. But enough of this. You've come a long way to challenge me. Now make a worthy effort. Venamis charged. To Plagueis, lightsaber duels were tedious affairs, full of wasted emotion and needless acrobatics. Tenebris, however, who had pronounced Plagueis a master of the art, had always enjoyed a good fight, and had clearly bequeathed that enthusiasm to his other trainee. For no sooner had the blades of their weapons clashed than Venamis began to bring the fight to him in unexpected ways, twirling his surprisingly limber body, tossing the lightsaber from hand to hand, mixing forms. At one point, he leapt onto an overhanging greel branch and, when Plagueis severed it with a force blow, hung suspended in the air, no mean feat in itself, and continued the fight, as if from high ground. Worse for Plagueis, Tenebris had made Venamis an expert in Plagueis' style, and so the Bith could not only anticipate, but counter Plagueis' every move. In short order, Venamis penetrated his defenses, searing the side of Plagueis' neck. The contest took them backward and forward through the trees, across narrow streams, and up onto piles of rocks that were the ruins of an ancient sentry post. Plagueis took a moment to wonder if anyone at the fort was observing the results of the contest, which from afar must have looked like lightning flashing through the forest's understory. Realizing that the fight could go on indefinitely, he took himself out of his body and began working his material self like a marionette, no longer on the offensive, instigating attacks, but merely responding to Venamis's lunges and strikes. Gradually the Bith understood that something had changed, that what up until then had been a fight to the death seemed suddenly like a training exercise. Exasperated, he doubled his efforts, fighting harder, more desperately, putting more power into each maneuver and blow, and in the end, surrendering his precision and accuracy. At the height of Venamus's attack, Plagueis came back into himself with such fury that his lightsaber became a blinding rod. A two-handed upward swing, launched from between his legs, caught Venamus off guard. The blade didn't go deep enough to puncture the Bith's lung, but scorched him from chest to chin. As his large, cleft head snapped backward in retreat, Plagueis brought his lightsaber straight down, tearing Venamus's weapon from his gloved hand, and nearly taking off his long fingers as well. With a gesture of his other hand, Venamus called for his lightsaber, but Plagueis was a split-second quicker, and the hilt shot into his own right hand. Venamus froze, allowing the nascent storm to die away, and dropped to his knees in surrender as Sojourn's risen primary blazed at his back through the trees. "I submit, Darth Plagueis. I accept that I must apprentice myself to you." Plagueis deactivated Venamus's blade and hooked it to his belt. "You presume too much, Venamus. Around you, I would always have to watch my back." Venamus lifted his face. "Is it true, Master? Is Darth Tenebris dead?" "Dead, and deservedly so." He took a step toward Venamus. "The future of the Sith no longer hinges on physical prowess, but on political cunning. The new Sith will rule less by brute force than by means of instilling fear." "And what is to become of me, Master?" Venamus asked. Plagueis studied him stonily. After a quick glance around, he snapped a yellow, horn-shaped blossom from a dangling vine and tossed it to the ground in front of Venamus. "Consume it." Venamus's gaze went from the flower to Plagueis, and he let misgiving show on his face. "I know this plant. It will poison me." "It will," Plagueis told him, in a manner that held no sympathy. "But I will make certain you don't die."